and gentlemen, in the red corner, hailing from the state of Nevada, representing the Steam and Wise Guys, it's the always feared Vegas Odds Maker! And in the blue corner, the crowd favorite from South Florida, Mark Winning Picks Lawrence! And now, let's get it on!
Against the spread, Winning Picks with Mark Lawrence.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back once again. This is Mark Lawrence along with Victor King, and we'll soon be joining our good friend Andy Iskoe from Las Vegas as we go against the spread on this week's college basketball and NBA games. And yes, the NBA is back after the All-Star break, or I should call it the All-Star fiasco, but nonetheless, they are back in action this week. Victor and I are going to tear apart a college basketball and NBA game of the week on the show this week. We'll visit with Andy Iskoe in Las Vegas to get his Vegas take and vibe as we go over the NCAA first seedings that came out from the NCAA. But now it's time to hoop it up on this week's ATS podcast show. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Victor King, where, Victor, I know that things are warming up in the Playbook office these days.
They are, Mark, and things are getting really, really hot around here. Before I run through the college and NBA selections as of late, you know, Mark, we got to talk about last week's podcast a little bit, and I was a little bit surprised that I'm sure you're aware we got more comments last week's podcast about South Florida German restaurants than we did anything else. I know we got numerous people who wanted more information about good German food down here in the Fort Lauderdale area. And before I run through all of our basketball numbers, let me at least respond to some of those people. They wanted to know about this great German restaurant that we went to last Wednesday night. And that was, of course, was Mark and Colleen. They hosted my brother Kurt and his wife Carrie, and of course myself and my wife Sandy down here at a wonderful restaurant in Plantation, Florida. That's one of these suburbs of Fort Lauderdale. And it's called Vienna Bar and Vienna Cafe. It's located in Plantation. If you're familiar with the area, it's on the corner of 595 and Pine Island Road. The food was fantastic. We thank Mark and Colleen very much for taking care of that delicious German meal down here. And Mark, I want to mention one more German restaurant, if I can. A couple of days earlier, we went to another great German restaurant down here. If you're familiar with the Fort Lauderdale area, there's a small suburb just north of downtown. It's called Pompano Beach.
Yes.
And there is a fantastic German restaurant there right on the corner of about Atlantic Avenue and A1A. And it is called Checkers Old München German restaurant. And we were also there a few days earlier and had a wonderful German meal at Checkers as well. So again, Mark, thanks to you and Colleen. Check out the Vienna Bar in Plantation, Florida. Check out Checkers Old München German restaurant in Pompano Beach if you want some delicious German food. And again, Mark, thank you very much for that.
Hey, it was my pleasure, Victor. As always, good catching up with Kurt and his beautiful wife, your beautiful wife, Sandy, and as well. We all had a good time breaking bread at the Vienna Cafe for sure. With that being, I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to jump in.
Sure. Now, for me, as you know, Mark, I handicap primarily NBA, so I've been enjoying a nice little kind of 7-day break myself. But you mentioned something about the All-Star game over the weekend, and it's gotten pretty much unwatchable, the NBA All-Star game. I watched all the Saturday night events. Those were a lot of fun, the three-point, the slam dunk contest, Mike McClung winning the slam dunk contest. And not only that, but on Sunday at 7:30, I turned into the actual All-Star game selection show, hoping there'd be some nice humor with Giannis and LeBron picking their squads. And there was. But you know what, Mark? As soon as the game started at about 8:45 p.m., I turned it off. You're absolutely right. It's pretty much unwatchable, the actual All-Star game itself. And if you take a look at the TV ratings, they have been horrific now, going on 5-6 years in a row. and the NBA needs to do some work in regards to that game. It's pretty much clueless these days. I'm sure you agree with me on that. And before I throw it back your way, Mark, we got to talk about somebody who's been very, very hot in basketball as of late, and that's my mentor. That's Mark, a perfect 5-0 ATS since Saturday in all basketball selections. Outstanding run, Mark. Since our last podcast, Mark Lawrence preferred picks 8-1 ATS in the NBA. Not only that, but in the last 4 weeks, 24-10 ATS overall. Dynamite numbers, particularly in college basketball. If you're not on board with Mark's service these days, you are missing out on some big-time profits. This is the time of the year that you do want to get on board. Mark, I hope you keep things going because it has been a great 3 to 4 week period here for all of your basketball customers.
Well, never a better time than just before the NCAA tournament, Victor. I like to always say because it ends up padding the bankroll per se, and you go into the tournament with a lot more confidence. So we'll see if we can keep that boat in the water and keep everybody excited, happy, and thrilled that March Madness is just right around the corner. Before we move on into our college basketball game of the week, Victor, we can't talk about the elephant that's in the room or not talk about it right now going into this particular show. And that's the situation going on in Alabama these days, and a terrible situation to say the least. Now, we know most of our podcast viewers and listeners out there probably know what's going on. For those of you who don't, it's simple. Alabama, you've got a problem. It's a shame that whenever a tragedy occurs, especially one that could have been avoided, has happened what's going on with Alabama here right now. And in my mind, it all lies squarely on the shoulders of their head coach, Nate Oates, who did not step up at all, showing any responsibility, didn't suspend a player, who lended a handgun to a teammate who shot or purportedly shot and murdered a woman over the weekend. There's no justification for stuff like that. And the worst part of it all, Victor, is the sad fact of the matter is they could be the number one seed in the NCAA basketball tournament. The player who is in question here is on the hot seat. Darius Miles is the fellow that's being accused of murdering the girl, but their star sensation freshman, he's going to be a lotto pick in the first 7 rounds, Brandon Miller, he's the one who supposedly gave him the gun in the first place. I just think Nate Oates has to step up, be held accountable for a situation like this, and I'll be stunned if he's still coaching at Alabama here when the NCAA tournament rolls around. That's my comment, Victor. What's your take on it?
You know, it's kind of a shame these days. I'd love to be able to, like last week, we talked about the fact that it's been a rough season for some of the classic blue bloods in college basketball. I'd love to be able to talk about the fact that we got some great cream rising to the crop these days that we have not seen in a while, like the great season for the Houston Cougars, or the Alabama team who's now number 2 in the country, or a team like Purdue, or some of the teams from some of the smaller conferences that are rising into the top 15, your Marquettes, your Miami of Florida. I'd love to be able to talk to the fact that it's been a down year in the ACC when only 2 teams are ranked, Virginia and our Hurricanes down here. But Mark, that's not something that we should talk about. The more we hear about this capital murder case involving Darius Miles, the worse it kind of seems to get for the Crimson Tide. And you called it, the more Nate Oates speaks, the more dishonest and dismissive that he sounds. The more information that's made public, the more it's clear that this school did not give a full accounting of a tragic situation. That's the information we got from yesterday, Tuesday's preliminary hearing, according to SI.com. We've got the fact that that freshman teammate, Brandon Miller, delivered the murder weapon to Miles at his request, and then he told his friend, the alleged trigger man, Michael Davis, where the gun was located. Alabama needs to get their program in order, and like you say, I would not be surprised that even though they are the number 2 team in the country, this might be the last season that Nate Oates is the commander for the Crimson Tide.
I agree, Victor, wholeheartedly. Just a terrible, terrible situation. And I do know this, that if Mike Krzyzewski were running this program here, we wouldn't be talking about him running away and hiding and being dismissive about this whole thing. We'd be talking about Coach K stepping up and doing what needs to be done in a situation like this. So I don't want to go off on a political jargon or a bandwagon and finger point and do all those types of things. But this is a serious situation, guys. When you have two players in your team that are both involved in first-degree murder charges, my goodness, and you want to keep your head in the sand and you don't want to address it, something has to be done with the program and what's going on with Alabama these days. You're tuned in to Mark Lawrence Against the Spread, the nation's most popular sports handicapping talk show. And before we get to our college basketball game of the week, I want to remind our listeners out there, if you like this show, I encourage you to hit the subscribe and the like buttons below. It would be very much appreciated. If you have any questions or comments, just let us know. Hit the subscribe or like buttons down below. We would greatly appreciate you doing just that as well. And with that, Victor, let's move on now to our college basketball game of the week inside the Pac-12 conference. We've got a pretty good basketball game here. And if it wasn't basketball, we'd be talking about these two teams that were playing in the Pac-12 football championship game. But instead, they're two pretty good basketball teams this year. When Southern Cal invades Utah this Saturday in a key Pac-12 matchup, Victor, how do you see the Trojans and the Utes shaking down on Saturday?
Right, both of these programs, they are no strangers to big games. You just called it two fantastic games in the college football season that just concluded. It's a Saturday night game, 8 o'clock Eastern. It is a game that's going to be nationally televised on ESPNU TV. That's USC at Utah, a great Pac-12 showdown. These are not the two best teams in the Pac-12 conference. Obviously, that would be UCLA and Arizona. But we got a couple of teams here that are having good seasons that are pretty much on the tournament bubble, if you will. There's obviously we're recording the podcast on Wednesday, Mark, so there has been no line posted for this game yet on Saturday night. But with that said, this year's earlier meeting at USC, it had an over-under line of 135.0. That's kind of where we will anticipate a line for this rematch, somewhere in the mid-130s. In that first meeting, the Trojans ended up winning at home 71-56. The under ended up cashing by 8 points. And on the season, both teams are kind of middle of the road, well, particularly USC, 14 overs, 13 unders on the year for the Trojans. Slightly higher results at home. They've gone 9-6 over-under at home. 142.0 is the combined average, but only 3-5 over-under on the road, and about 5 to 6 less points per game when USC takes to the road at 135.5, and that even includes 1-4 over-under in their last 5 conference road games. So slightly lower scoring results for the Trojans this year in the role of a visitor. On the flip side, we pretty much know, Mark, what we're getting in the Utes, one of the better under teams in all of college hoops this season. They've gone 10-18 over-under in their 28 games, 69.8 points per game on offense, only 62.9 points per game allowed on defense, and even better at home, as the Utes are allowing only 61 points per game, and that's the second lowest points per game allowed at home in the entire Pac-12 conference, right next to UCLA, who allows only 56.2. Also for the Utes, 6-11, around 65% under in conference play, only 130.4 combined points per game. For me, Mark, the clincher is the fact that something that the main man sent me earlier this morning, and that would be, Mark, the fantastic defensive numbers for both of these teams. USC allowing only 39.2 shooting on defense this year. That's 10th best in the entire country, including only 33% from three-point land. And, of course, that's out of 363 total teams. So if you're in the top 10 in defense, we're going to be looking under in your game. And guess what? Utah's numbers, Mark, are even better, ranked number 7 in the country in total defense. allowing only 38.9% in field goal percentage. And again, that includes only 28% from three-point land, which is actually one of the strengths of USC's offense. These great defensive numbers for both teams, Mark, suggest that an appropriate over-under line would be somewhere in the range of 130.0 or less points. So we're going to end up going low in this one. Every point higher than we see the over-under line over 132 increases our value on the under. Either way, we should see a slightly lower scoring Pac-12 game than the odds makers anticipate, and we will be going low with a selection on the under.
Victor looks for defense to prevail in the Southern Cal Utah basketball game on Saturday, and I wholeheartedly agree with that because that's what both of these teams bring to the table. And it's another reason that both of these teams will be in the NCAA basketball tournament this basketball season as well. Take a look at the Trojans who come into Utah here. They beat the Utes 5 weeks ago when they played earlier on in the season, 71-56. They beat them pretty good at home when Utah invaded Southern Cal. The Trojans have a same season revenge rematch up on deck with Arizona. Now, I'm not saying they're going to look past Utah here to Arizona, but Arizona is a much bigger basketball name and bigger game, if you will, for Southern Cal. And you've also got the fact that in this series here, Southern Cal has struggled mightily. They're only 6-14 to the spread the last 20 games. And in fact, inside those 20 games, when they were not favored by more than 4 points, they're just 1-11 straight up and against the spread. Not very good numbers the Trojans bring into this contest. For the Utah Utes, they're sitting right now at 17-11 on the bubble as we do the podcast here on Wednesday. Every game is big for Utah moving forward here. They'll have a chance to make a move or a better position in the Pac-12 tournament. But right now, every win is important for this basketball program here. What I also like about them is they are a long-term success at home. And when I say that, I opened up the well-oiled machine and looked at Utah and how well they perform at home in conference games. I would say very well. About 60, 34, and 2 against the spread their last 96 conference home games. 60, 34, and 2 against the spread, the Utah Utes at home. They're coming into this contest off 2 losses exact. I love examining teams when they're off 2 losses or 2 wins exact because they're either going to be moving on to an extended losing or winning streak, and what happens, or we can find out what we can anticipate from teams like this. Well, they've responded real well in games off 2 losses exact, 19-12 straight up, 18-13 to the spread. Bottom line to me here, guys, is Utah is a 5 returning starter basketball team from last year who had a losing record, and they're anxious to make the dance this year. I'm going to stay at home with Utah to get their revenge behind those 5 returning starters, and I'll play them over Southern Cal for our college basketball game of the week. And before we move on to our NBA game of the week, I'm going to pass this note on to our listeners and viewers out there as well. Our producer, Greg DePalma, who's got a really good handle, he loves money lines, okay? Whether it's football, basketball, he likes that big juice for the squeeze, or squeeze for the juice, if you will. And he mentions earlier coming onto the show here, what about South Carolina on the money line against Alabama Wednesday night? And my answer to that is why not? I mean, all this garbage that's going on with Alabama these days, this team is not in the proper mental frame of mind at all to be playing basketball here. So, Greg, I like your way of thinking with your money line plays, and that's exactly where I'd be looking with you. South Carolina money line over Alabama Wednesday night, if you catch the show as early as that. Now, let's move on to our NBA game of the week. And we've got a beauty on tap on Saturday as the boys are back in town. The association's back after the All-Star break. And we're going to put a big game here between Philadelphia and Boston, 2 teams that are likely to meet in the Eastern Conference playoffs, whether it'll be the finals or the semifinals. A lot has been to be determined. You got Milwaukee and Cleveland in the mix there as well. But right now, Philadelphia, Boston, 2 division teams squaring off toe-to-toe on Saturday. Victor, how do you see this neighborhood, not so friendly neighborhood rivalry between these 2 teams faring out on Saturday?
Well, Mark, you said it. We say welcome back, boys, and that's for the pro NBA athletes who have been sitting out here for about a week or so. This is the nationally televised ABC TV Saturday night game as well. The entire country is going to be watching it. We're tipping off at 8:40 p.m. Eastern, in Philadelphia. Again, no line posted as of yet. I'm anticipating Philadelphia maybe -1 to -3 points in the game, and over underline somewhere in the mid to high 220s. The last game between these two teams, which was played back on February the 8th, the over underline was 227.5. So we're thinking going to be somewhere around there. In terms of the series, 3 out of the last 4 have gone over the total. 4 of the last 4, that's each of the last 4 played in Philadelphia, have gone over the total between these two teams. Average margin plus 8.0 points per game. Now, Mark, I got a couple of in-season over-under patterns that make this game a little bit more difficult to handicap, particularly from a totals perspective. First off, Boston, they are the league's #1 over team at home this year.
Wow.
This game's not at home; it's on the road.
Right.
But they've gone 20-10 over under at home, 233.0 combined points per game. But not only are they the #1 home over team, Boston is the #1 road under team this season. Their road games have gone 18-2 over under, only 225.7. You want to talk about contrast. All you got to do is think Boston overs at home and Boston unders on the road. But it's not that simple. Meanwhile, Philadelphia, they're also a very strong home over team on the season. They've gone 19-12 over under, 226.0 combined points per game for Philadelphia. Now, Boston, they closed the pre-All-Star portion of their schedule by going over in 7 of their last 10 games, including a perfect 4-0 to the over in their final 4 games, and with a high average as well. Boston games averaged 240.7 combined points per game during that 4-game over streak to close the pre-All-Star portion of their schedule. Philadelphia, they've been on a hot over run as well. In the last 2 months, they've gone 65% over the total, 13 overs, only 7 unders in their last 20 games. With that said, Mark, I need some more work. I got to get back into the database. And Atlantic Division games, that's what we have here, an Atlantic Division game. They've got a middle of the road 16-14 over under on the season. However, these games have gone 9-1 to the over when the home team is favored. So I think you can kind of see where we're going here. Also, with both teams, you mentioned amongst the highest winning percentages on the season. Boston is 712 winning percentage, Philadelphia right at 667. Our database tells us that since late October, NBA games featuring 2 teams who have a winning percentage of 650 or higher have gone 12-2 to the over when A, again, the home team is favored, and B, the over-under line is 220 or more points. And finally, Mark, I also ran a combination day of the week and rest situation over-under query in our database that applies to this game here. And the fact that both teams will come in with 1 day rest and the game's being played on a Saturday. The results, once again, they're pointing in the direction of the over. NBA, same conference games in a 1-1 rest situation on Saturdays have gone 10-1 to the over this season when the over-under line is greater than 213 points. With all of that said, we'll consider the over in this game, providing A, Philadelphia is favored in the game, and B, if the over-under line is 230 or less points. If Boston comes out as a road fave, we're going to pass on the total. But again, we'll put our pedal to the metal and bet on the over if Philadelphia comes out being the home favorite in this great game on Saturday night in the NBA.
Good observation by Victor King on the total in this basketball game. A few yin and yang numbers here. Boston a really good under team away, but making a solid case over elsewhere with all the stats surrounding the basketball game. And I think, Victor, personally, the only way that you'll find Boston being favored here is if there's a Philadelphia injury. I can't see them letting Philadelphia dress up as a home dog in the basketball game. So, but remember those provisions, A and B, as Victor says, to go over the total in the basketball game. Take a look at the Sixers in this contest here, where they've made all their money this year at home, just like Boston on the road. Here's Philadelphia at home, 21-10 to the spread. And there are 31 home games before the All-Star break. That's pretty strong. But here's what's even more impressive. In those home games, when they've had same season revenge, the other team took them out in an earlier meeting this year. They've been at home 8 times this year. They're 8-0 straight up and against the spread when avenging a same season loss. Now, they went into that same role on Thursday. We're doing the show on Wednesday. They played Memphis on Thursday. So see if it stays true. If they win and cash against Memphis, that streak moves to 9-0. Going into this basketball game Saturday night. Philadelphia was 7-0 straight up into the number in this series until they've taken 3 consecutive straight up and point spread losses, including a pair of losses to Boston this year. I think everything stops at 3 because 3 becomes domination from that point forward here. So Philadelphia will find them to be a highly focused basketball team coming into the contest here. Taking a look at Boston here, they took a really strong winning record into the All-Star break. They were 5-1 straight up and 6-0 to the spread their previous 6 games prior to the All-Star break. And until they visited here last year when they won a basketball game, they had lost 5 straight, both up, straight up, and to the spread in games in Philadelphia. Now, I also note in the database here that Boston just happens to have the New York Knicks and the Cleveland Cavaliers on deck, with Boston having same season revenge against each of those 2 opponents here. So they may be a little bit focused, a little bit more than usual to their next 2 basketball games. If they are, it could end up being their Waterloo here. I'm going to stay at home with Philadelphia to get their revenge on a strong home court where they've been especially strong with same season revenge. I'll stay at home with the Sixers for my side in this basketball game. And with that, it's time to move on to Las Vegas as we join with our good friend Andy Iskoe, who joins us from Vegas to get the Vegas vibe to find out what's going on in Vegas these days. And Andy, I know there's a lot going on in Vegas these days because the NCAA basketball is heating up right now as we're speaking.
Yeah, exactly, Mark. Good to join you again. And, of course, the sports never really have a dull or a lull point. You think everything's going to drop after the Super Bowl is over. What do we have the following week? Well, we have the start of the XFL. We have the continuation of the NBA, the NHL, college basketball, and we have what is arguably the biggest NASCAR race of the season, the Daytona 500. So just when you think things are going to calm down, no, steady as she goes, and there's more and more coming our way. We did have the announcement by the NCAA Tournament Committee, which is somewhat meaningless for the most part, but fun for people to talk about over the next few weeks. As we record this on Wednesday, we are basically 2.5 weeks away from Selection Sunday, and then of course we've got the entire month of about the next 2 weeks or so, the conference tournaments, 2.5 weeks. Then we've got the big tournaments, and while in the midst of all this, Major League Baseball season gets underway. In fact, this Friday, the first few spring training games are going to be played. I believe 1 or 2 of the 3 are going to be on the MLB Network as far as being able to watch some of these teams get set. So I love the fact that we are in an industry that even though it's 7 days a week for 365 days, because of the spreading out of the sports and the overlapping of the sports, it's always entertaining and challenging.
Andy, I'm going to one-up you there. I'm going to throw another name in the hat with what's all going on right now. How about the USFL? They're going to be starting their gig here. I think it's next month, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're coming back for another session this year as well. So they're doing everything they can to keep us.
Oh, and then by the way, within a week to 10 days of the conclusion of March Madness, the Masters.
There we go. That's always a good time. No question about that. We're visiting with Andy Iskoe from TheLogicalApproach.com in Las Vegas, where we're going to roundtable Andy, Victor, and I each week from now through March Madness when we check in and visit with Andy. And our topic on the show here is going to be the NCAA Selection Show, which will be on March 12th. But NCAA has now started something new, and it's likable, very, very likable. And what they did last week was they seeded every team for the NCAA basketball tournament, or what they proposed to be the seeds for the tournament. And before I turn this over to Victor and then back to Andy here, a couple of little notes that once they made that announcement here. On the new win report at playbook.com, WIN win report, what's important now, we have an article about this exact topic here. And you'll read on the article on the topic here that 65 of the 80 teams that were revealed since the first show in 2017, you'll find here 65 of the 80 teams made the tournament, including 15 of the last 16 last year. And for the number one seeds, exactly 3 of the 4 number one seeds every year have held on to the top spot in the actual bracket. So you can check those out all online at playbooksports.com and check out the win report to find out exactly who all those are. Victor, what's your take on this new seeding by the NCAA and how will it affect the tournament upcoming?
I think it's very exciting, Mark, as far as the seeding and, of course, the upcoming selection show here in, about 2.5 weeks. It looks like that your major conferences, like the Big Ten, like the Big 12, even like the SEC, I see all 3 of those conferences getting at least 7 teams in, perhaps even 8. You may even see 9 or more when it comes to the Big Ten. What is surprising to me is the fact that, and we touched on the Pac-12 conference in our college basketball game of the week, I don't see any more than 3, maybe 4 teams from the Pac-12 making it. I mean, you may even see more teams from the Mountain West than the Pac-12 making it as far as the conference breakdown goes. And of course, I touched on it very, very briefly at the top of the show, and the fact that it's been such a down year in the ACC conference. Duke, I don't know if they're going to make it. Will North Carolina make the tournament? Hats off to our Hurricanes down here in South Florida, now ranked number 13 in the country. Virginia's got that fantastic defense. They're a top 10 team as well. But a lot has to go right for teams like Duke and particularly North Carolina to make the big dance.
Andy, on that topic, you and I talked a little bit before the show here, and the first thing that you commented on was the teams that did not make the seeding by the NCAA basketball tournament, the teams that were left out or snubbed, if you will. Who are some of those teams, Andy, that caught your eye right off the bat, if you would?
Well, I'm considering the 16 teams that are seeded 1 through 4, basically the teams that are expected, according to the seedings, to make the Sweet 16. What I was surprised at, so we're not talking about how many teams from each conference will make the tournament, just how many will be the protected seeds 1 through 4 in each of the 4 regions, and I was shocked because you usually don't see this when you're talking about the top 16 teams. 5 of them came from the Big 12. Okay, I can understand them getting 8, maybe even 9, although I personally would only put 6 in there because you still have to, even though it's a strong conference, there's still going to be some at the bottom of the conference. And, you put 8 teams in from one conference, you're going to take them away from other conferences. So, for example, of the top 16 seeds, the AAC had probably only 1 team that's going to make it. You might make a case for 2 or possibly 2 others, and that's Houston. They deserve to be a number 1 seed based upon their body of work so far, and I think they have in the Midwest region. I could see Tulane making it into the field. I could also see Memphis possibly making it into the field. You take a look at the ACC, where they only have Virginia as far as one of the top 4 seeds. I would wait till the end of the ACC tournament. I think there are a few other teams that have a chance. I know a team that you both talked about, and I've already made a futures play on them. I think it was 50-1 or something, 40 or 50-1, and that's Miami. I think they have a real good case if they win the ACC tournament, especially of being one of those top 16 teams to be one of the 4 regional seeds in those positions. The Big East, they have 2. Xavier and Marquette. I agree with Marquette being up there. The other team that I like in the I could make somewhat of a case for Creighton, but certainly Providence and Ed Cooley is a team that I could see winning the Big East tournament and certainly being one of the top 16 seeds. But overall, that conference may just get the top 4 in there. I think it'll be Creighton, Marquette, Xavier, and Providence. UConn, maybe with a big run, might knock out a team like a Creighton or something along those lines, depending upon how the rest of the season falls out. The Big Ten, who did they have in there? They had, I believe it was Indiana and Purdue. Purdue is fading. Indiana is somewhat surging. team nobody's talking about, the second place team in the Big Ten, because you're not accustomed to seeing them. I think they've only been to one NCAA tournament in their history, and that's Northwestern, a very legitimate team. Big Ten is still a solid conference, but a very competitively balanced conference throughout. I think the team like in 9th or 10th place are like 9-7 in conference play, which is very good. So I was surprised that only two Big Ten teams, because Northwestern wasn't going to get a lot of recognition. In the SEC, the two teams they had in there were Alabama, a number one seed, in fact, the overall number one seed. And then they also had Tennessee, a team that's also been struggling a little bit of late, losing twice to Kentucky. I think Kentucky has played themselves into the field. I think you'll see a couple of other teams from the SEC, because I think they'll get probably 4 or 5. I actually have Texas A&M, who's having a fine but unnoticed season. Looking at well, I mentioned Kentucky, Alabama, Tennessee. I think Arkansas has a chance to make a nice little run as well, but only 2 of those teams in the top 16, which is unusual. The Pac-12, I think, Victor, you may be right. I kind of think the Pac-12 might get 3, and the Mountain West Conference might get 3. In addition to Arizona and UCLA, both of whom I agree to being one of the top 16 teams, although I disagree with UCLA as a number 2 seed being put in the Eastern bracket rather than one of the Midwest, or, well, they can't be in the West because Arizona is going to be there as the number 1 seed. But I might make a case for USC with a strong finish. They've played a decent schedule at the start of the season. And the other conference is considered the Atlantic 10. I really don't see anybody other than Virginia Commonwealth, who I think is in, even if they don't win the Atlantic 10 title. Dayton's in second place, but Dayton, which was a phony top 25 team at the start of the season, has continued to be somewhat erratic. The West Coast Conference is interesting. Usually it's automatically conceded that Gonzaga is going to win the conference tournament, and be a high seed. Well, they will be in the tournament. They already are one of the top 16 teams. I think St. Mary's also is in the tournament as well. Whether they get a third team instead of the Pac-12 or the Mountain West. Mountain West is interesting, although they don't have a very good tournament record in recent years. It looks as though San Diego State is in, Boise State likely, and then maybe you choose between Nevada, Utah State, and possibly New Mexico, although New Mexico has faded down the stretch, so maybe they get third. I think it's hard to see them get 4 in, like I think they did last year and a few years earlier, when I believe each time they may have had 1 win in there, but I think they've lost one. They've had more than 3 teams in the tournament. So I'd say of the deserving teams, probably the one that, well, I could certainly make a case for Northwestern, even though they're not a basketball power. They are in second place. I thought they could have been one of the top seeds, but I think, while I think the Big 12 is the best conference top to bottom, to get 5 of the top 16 teams as far as regional finalists or regional semifinal seeds, Sweet 16, I think that's a bit much.
Well, let me ask you this question, Victor. If, as I mentioned earlier on, that in this poll or survey per se that the NCAA puts out, of the 4 number 1 seeds, exactly 3 of the 4 have made it every year. Which of the 4 number 1 seeds, Victor, would you think which team might be in the most danger? Those being Alabama, Houston, Kansas, and Purdue. Those are the 4 number 1 seeds on the initial send-out by the NCAA. Which of those 4 you think, Victor, will be the odd guy out if that continues 3 out of 4 every year?
It could very well be Alabama here. It'll depend on how this tragic situation impacts their team moving forward and heading into the SEC tournament. But one could easily suggest it might just be the Crimson Tide who's the odd man out.
Andy, what's your thought on that?
Well, a lot of it depends upon the strength of these conferences. I mean, I would think Kansas would not be the first team, one of the 4 seeds out, but they play in that very tough Big 12 conference. So I think the odds are, because of the depth of that conference, Kansas could lose in the championship game, and then they might, depending who they lose to, maybe a Baylor who had beaten them, I think, earlier this year, could end up. I don't know that they would replace Kansas with another Big 12 team. I could also see Purdue being knocked out simply because they have struggled over the last 10 days to 2 weeks. Although, again, really, when you get beyond Purdue, I think it's hard to envision Northwestern, even if they win the Big Ten title, getting the number 1 seed. And there's a drop-off between those 2 teams and the rest of the conference as of right now, with only about 3 or 4 conference games remaining. So I could see Purdue being eliminated. Houston probably has the easiest path to hold on to the number 1 seed. We'll find out. I think they have a game coming up either tonight or in the next week against the second-place team, Tulane. So they have a pretty easy time making it into or maintaining that number 1 seed. And then the 4th one, Alabama. They've been the most consistent team all along, but this situation that you discussed with Victor earlier, it's been going on for a few weeks. When the killing first happened in January, they seem to have responded okay. It remains to be seen what happens. Will there be any suspensions? Will there be any legal activities between now and the time of the selection Sunday? I heard your comment about Greg liking South Carolina tonight on the money line. I actually played them plus the 17 points because I do think it's a distraction. They've been, they had to have been hearing all the buzz about it the last few days. It wouldn't shock me if they lost, because this is a perfect spot for them to lose. But if they end up showing they may get wins the rest of the way, but if they show a decline in their performance, they could get knocked off. I mean, I mentioned before, Kentucky, a team that's surging right now. Tennessee's been struggling. Alabama should be able to hold on to the number 1 seed, but I would say of the non-basketball related events, Alabama is the one that's going to be most challenged.
I concur with that, Andy, and Victor as well. I'd make all 3 of us. I think Alabama being the number 1 seed that might be the most in jeopardy, at least as we're doing the show at this particular time. Let me also say here, Andy, that you opened it up with teams that didn't make this Sweet 16, seeded in the first 4 seeds. And you mentioned Miami of Florida. They would have been my choice as well. Jim Larenega's got a very good basketball team down here.
And a good track record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he's got a great track record. Exactly right. He's very, very well liked, and a lot of, like you say, a lot of history behind him right now. They could be a very dangerous team in this NCAA tournament because, number one, the ACC is not real deep this year. They could end up winning that tournament, as you mentioned. And if they do, they'll go into the NCAA tournament with a lot of momentum, per se, if you will. We're visiting with Andy Iskoe from TheLogicalApproach.com in Las Vegas, Victor King from PlaybookSports.com, as well as we go over the NCAA basketball tournament, which will be upcoming here soon. We love doing these roundtables with you, Andy. I'm going to look forward to doing more of the same in the weeks to come as the NCAA tournament gets closer and closer. Until then, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this. Did you look at this weekend's games, any at all? If you didn't, I don't want to throw you under the bus. I know it's kind of hard forecasting long range when we do this on Wednesday, and we're talking about it coming up on Saturday. We do our games of the week, and that involves a little bit more forethought to it. But I don't want to put you under the gun here. Is there any game in particular that if you don't like, at least is word commentary noteworthy on this weekend's card?
Well, actually, it's one of the first games, one of the early games on Saturday that I have been looking at, and I know this is something that both you and Victor use late in the season. That's teams' final home games before the postseason conference tournaments begin. And one game is a game, Clemson at North Carolina State. I have both teams in the field of 68, although I don't have either of them as the number 1 seed. As we mentioned before, Virginia, they've got as one of those top 16 seeds. And the other one that I would have put in with you was Miami, but I think Clemson and NC State both make the field. If I've got my schedule here correct, the final game of North Carolina State, now they host Wake Forest tonight, Wednesday night. And then on Saturday, they host Clemson. That looks like that's their final regular season game. They end the season on the 28th, which is a game at Duke. So unless I've got an incomplete schedule, and I don't believe I do, this will be on Saturday, NC State, the Wolfpack's final home game of the season. They lost at NC State earlier in the season, so you've got a little bit of the revenge situation, but I think the fact that it's the last home game will ensure a pretty good effort, considering the final game is against a team that is, I don't know, some people have them on the bubble, some people have them in, some people could see them needing to win in the tournament. Their final game at Duke, I think, will be a very difficult spot for NC State. So I think they get their win and make the visiting alumni and the traveling alumni at the game very happy.
Andy, on the Tobacco Road scene between NC State this weekend, looking at them in their possible final home game of the season. Andy, a great job on the show as always. We're going to look forward to catching up with you again next week as we go deeper and deeper into the upcoming NCAA basketball tournament. Until then, nothing but the best of success to you this weekend.
Deeper and deeper and closer to one of the best times of the year. Victor,
Yes.
Mark, all the viewers and listeners, let's have a great weekend as the best part of the basketball season is just ahead of us, just on the horizon.
Thank you so much. That was Andy Iskoe joining us from TheLogicalApproach.com in Las Vegas. And speaking about Las Vegas, let's move on to our good friend Jim Feist, who joins us from Las Vegas. And Jim has some wise words of advice on this year's NCAA Tournament futures. Listen to what Jim has to say now here on Mark Lawrence Against the Spread.
Hello, Mark, back for another week of college basketball. I'll get into the NBA again as the second half of the season gets rolling. But right now we're going to concentrate a little bit on the futures market in the NCAA and look at the teams. I mean, the ACC, Big 12, Big 10, Pac-12, SEC. I mean, you got Alabama, you got Houston, the big guns out there. You got Purdue from the 10. What I'm looking for here is this is going to be a very difficult field. There is no team, in my opinion, that is just head and shoulders above everybody else. Yes, you have Houston, you have Purdue, you got Alabama, you got UCLA, Kansas, but here's what I'm going to look for. Obviously, if I make any future bets, I'm going to look for some prices, and that's important. Now, when you talk about prices, you got to look at where you're going to get the dark horse from. We all know the Big 12 is the league everybody says is the best league, but the Big East, they're not so bad. You got the Creightons and Marquettes, the Xaviers. No, we don't have Villanova anymore right now. Jay Wright left. They're not what they used to be. But you've got teams, and if they have good, strong guard play, then you can have somebody that can really upset the apple cart here. Now, granted, I've seen Houston play a number of times. I've seen Memphis play a number of times. Purdue, I like Purdue. The big guy is incredible, but I don't like their guard play that much. I don't think they're going to go that far. So I would not be putting any money. Of course, I wouldn't be putting any money on them anyway. They're 8-1 at one of the books. I mean, there's lots of prices out there you can shop for. And I'm not going to bet these short prices. Houston at 7-1, Alabama 8-1, Purdue 8-1, UCLA 12-1. These are short prices to me. Where are you going to get? Let's say you look at a Creighton who started the season off red hot, then went into just losing everything by short numbers. Yeah, you got Tennessee that matches up pretty well at times. Now, let's take a look at a 35-1 team, TCU. They went into a slump for a few games when Miles was out. But this Miles kid is a superstar at the next level, and in college hoops, he is dominating. They put up 100 the other night. This is a tough team. Now, you can get 35-1 on a team like that, and they can get through the first couple rounds. You got some hedging possibilities, and you got a big payday ahead of you. So like to put a hundy on 135-1 or 50. You want to go bigger, 1,000? You're looking for some big money. Marquettes of the world, Virginia, you can't. This is going to be an open field. I think that there's 30 teams that have a good shot. 30, that's right, 30. But you're going to have the top 4 seeds, so the number one draws, they get less games, they get a better situation, big advantage. yes, they should be favored. They've had better seasons than the others, but look at these guys. I mean, you get in Arizona at 16-1, Kansas at 14-1. Kansas at 14-1, TCU 35-1 is ridiculous. There's not that much separation. They're pretty close. So if you can grab a TCU at 35-1 or 25-1, you got a bargain. So I'm looking at a wide open tournament. Now, granted, we're going to have to go through the conference tournaments first, and that's where you're going to see some upsets as well, because there's so many teams that can get in this year. It would be a shame to have some of these guys sit at home, but that's what's going to happen because there are just too many good teams. But like I said, there's nobody on the top that's head and shoulders above everyone else. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I look forward to working with you on all of this in the coming weeks. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, guys. See you next week.
Thank you so much, Jim. Sage words of advice, I must say, from a handicapping legend from Las Vegas, Jim Feist. Check out all of his complimentary and selection top plays available at playbooksports.com each and every day. Now, we're going to move on. One quick note here. Victor, as you know, we started a thing called the Coffee Club a couple of years ago, and it's really, really catching on with everybody. And what the Coffee Club basically is, it's my daily e-letter to everybody that goes in your inbox every day, and it's 3 or 4 little facets of handicapping information that I pass along with commentary, stats, and facts. And we supply that to everybody who's a subscriber to either our services or our publications. And unfortunately, the Super Bowl ended and a lot of those subscriptions expired. But I want to mention this here now as we're doing the podcast here. The good news is that you can subscribe or continue to subscribe to the Coffee Club. It's only $20 a month. You can do that online at playbooksports.com, or better yet, if you subscribe now to the price freeze for the 2023 Playbook football newsletter this upcoming football season, you'll begin to get your Coffee Club every day starting the day you subscribe through next year's Super Bowl. So that could be almost as much as one whole year of the Coffee Club. Part of a bonus, part of the price freeze for the $129 newsletter. Last year's price, get it now because it's going to expire at the end of February. Check it out all online. The 2023 Playbook football newsletter price freeze at playbooksports.com. Now, we're going to move on to Victor King to get his complimentary play on the NBA basketball card this week. But Victor, before I do that, I'd be remiss if I didn't run this by you here. We got some comments in the Coffee Club, in fact, from a couple of listeners that we talked about. A listener wrote in about how he thought that the referees played too much of a part in the Super Bowl game this year, and not liking to see the games decided by the zebras, more by the players in the field here. He asked the question of how much do we put into handicapping these games when they involve certain referees or certain umpires? And my answer to him was, we're going to go to the source on the podcast this week, and that's Victor King, because I know, Victor, you do utilize referees and umpires a lot in your handicapping. And if you could explain to our listeners out there how it is that you go about that.
It's a very good question, and there's no definitive answer. I'll say this. We do utilize referee information in the NFL, in our NBA over-under selections, in Major League Baseball as well. But it's not a be-all, end-all. It's just another tool that we utilize in addition to our database and, of course, researching teams' recent form, last 10 games. Not so much in the NFL and even not so much in pro basketball. But I'll say this, Mark. I believe in no other sport does the referee have more impact on the totals or the over-unders than the home plate umpire in Major League Baseball. And I'll easily tell you that anywhere from 30 to 40% of our total baseball handicapping is tied in to the home plate under. Not so much in the baskets, not so much in the NFL. If I see a side I like in one of those two respective sports, I'll then take a look at the referee information, and if it backs us up, we might bump the rating of our play ever so slightly. But just think of it as an additional tool to utilize when you're handicapping and subsequently betting on these particular games.
Good tip from Victor here. Use it as an additive. Don't use it as something to play alone, just like you don't play an angle alone, a system, or a trend alone. handicapping is an accumulation of edges, and Victor adds those referees, those umpires, as an edge into his handicapping. So keep that thought in mind if you wish to approach it from that standpoint. And Victor, before we close out the show, I know our listeners would love to know what you've got on tap for your complimentary play. I'm going to guess in the NBA this weekend.
You have got that right. And Mark, you mentioned the price freeze on the Playbook football newsletter. But man, oh man, we can't forget this either. This is the current basketball newsletter. You see that best bets 8-1 last week. Guess what, Mark? With the two more winners in this week's issue, those numbers are actually up to 10-1, with some more games forthcoming on Wednesday, on Thursday, and Friday of this week. So don't forget the very hot Playbook basketball newsletter as well, available at our playbooksports.com website. And I'm thrilled that the NBA is back again. We've already got 3 totals plays up on Thursday when the NBA returns. You can also check that out at the website. And Mark, for a free play, we're going to take a look at the Friday NBA schedule. The very last game on the card is a Pacific Division affair. Sacramento Kings taking on the LA Clippers. We're going to anticipate a line somewhere in the mid-230s for this particular game. That's the Kings on the road against the LA Clippers on Friday night. Heck, you can't argue with a season series that has seen the over-under go 3-11 between these two teams. That's only 3 overs and 11 unders in the last 4 meetings. Heck, that's nothing. Check out the last 5 meetings between these two teams. All 5 of them under the total, Kings versus Clippers, an average of only 210.0 combined points per game. For some reason, as of late, when these two Pacific Division teams take on each other, it's more of a grind than a shootout. And if the over-under line is going to be over 230 in this game, we're going to play the value on the under. After all, why not? The LA Clippers are the #1 home under team this season. Clipper home games have gone 6 overs, 22 unders on the season. Only 115.3 points per game is the average for the Clippers at home. And I mentioned the last 5 meetings have gone under, and all by margins of 9 or more points in this particular series. Now, Sacramento, they're a team that has a very similar MO when it comes to over-under numbers as the Boston Celtics. A great home over team, but a good road under team. Let me check it out. Clippers at home this season, 19 overs, only 10 unders. However, when they take to the road, they're 9-19 over under on the seasons, and that is the Sacramento Kings. Don't forget, this game has got a weird rest situation as Sacramento plays on Thursday night, so they'll be coming into this Friday night game unrested, while the Clippers are playing with a full 7 days of rest. We got a small sample size in the database, Mark, but it's convincing. Nevertheless, conference home favorites in a 6+0 rest situation. That means the home team is playing with 6 or more days rest. They're taking on an opponent who just played the day before. These games have gone 1-9-1 over under in the last 10 years. There you have it. There's going to be some value as we play the Kings and Clippers under the total on Friday night. Again, Mark, as we mentioned, don't forget the hot basketball newsletter and the fact that our Thursday NBA selections are already available for the taking at playbooksports.com. And I know someone's got a really, really big weekend in store as well.
Yeah, that we do, Victor. We're going to look to keep that ball bouncing. That's a nice paraphrase to use in basketball these days because we're going really, really kind of warm. I'm going to say hot is what we are. We'll just flat out say it. We're hot right now. We're looking to keep that intact this particular weekend. And just a reminder to our listeners out there that if you want to receive any of whatever it is Victor King is doing, just remember this shortcut address. It's pb, like playbook, pb.buzz, like short, pb.buz/VK for Victor King. pb.buzz/VK. That will take you right to Victor King's page at the playbooksports.com website where you can see exactly what he's got available for sale each and every day. pb.buzz/VK. And that's going to put the final wraps in this edition of Mark Lawrence Against the Spread. I want to thank our co-host Victor King from King Creole Sports, our good friend Andy Iskoe joining us from Las Vegas as he does each and every week. And until next week when we're back with another March Madness edition here on Mark Lawrence Against the Spread. This is Mark Lawrence, reminding you to always to remember to bet with your head, not over it. And good luck as always.